And this is a special presentation here on Modern Retro Radio. This is Audi, owner and operator of the station. And not only do I love music, I also admire a great comic or two. And my hero of all heroes, probably bigger than Elvis, bigger than James Brown, bigger than Clapton, bigger than McCartney, has been my favorite entertainer of all time, who passed away August, a little over a year and a half ago, over a year ago. The one and only comic genius, Jerry Lewis. And to some people, Jerry Lewis is vastly overrated, but to folks like me, he's vastly underrated, particularly in this country. But not with the fans, more so with the critics. And going to have just a free-for-all discussion with two very qualified younger fans, and we're going to kibitz and throw out all kinds of anecdotes. But I want to introduce a young aspiring filmmaker and a good buddy of mine named Thad, and a young up-and-coming choreographer named Kat. Say hello to the people, guys.
Hi. Hey, everybody.
now,
Hi, everybody.
Now, Thad, you're all the way out in Walla Walla, Washington. And where are you, Kat?
Phoenix, Arizona, or Peoria, Arizona.
Wow.
It's like a
That's where you are? Whoa.
20 years
Okay.
here.
Okay. That was my first Jerry impression of the night. Okay. Well, Jerry Lewis, I'll just start off with this. He's a complicated, highly original, totally unguarded comedian who also had an exceptional skill for the technical aspects of presenting his art. And we're going to just kind of jump around all over the place. But I want to start off asking you two, since you are younger fans, what was the moment that made the initial impact on you? I know with me, I was 5 years old and saw a rerun of The Nutty Professor on television, and the Buddy Love character just knocked me out. I didn't understand it, but I was just so fascinated with just seeing Jerry Lewis as Buddy Love. I just couldn't take my eyes off of him, and I think he speaks to children in such a unique way by just a simple being. So what was the impetus for you two?
Well, for me, I think the first time I saw him was like when I was 5 on Mad About You. It was like my mom just pointed to the screen and was like, "That's Jerry Lewis," and I was like in amazement because he was like tap dancing.
Yeah.
And like I wanted to start dancing at that time. And then I don't think I saw him. I think like throughout the years, I just randomly saw him on TV, through the telephone, and I mean, he was just there. And then one day, I think I watched Cinderfella when I was a teenager, and I was like, who is this strange man?
Interesting.
It was like very interesting because like compared to other old Hollywood movie stars, like he was quite different.
Yeah.
Than what I was used to seeing, and so I remember when he was coming down the stairs in his red jacket, and he comes out as Cinderfella.
Yeah.
At the ballroom scene, that was like, wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah. No one can make an entrance like Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, and I didn't see him for like a few years later, and I would see him randomly on TV with like Dean Martin, like those Loving It Up on TCM, which is Turner Classic Movies.
Yeah.
And then my dad was like, I don't want to see that. And then he was like, is there anything else on? Like eventually he became a fan after I became a fan. So
really?
That's good anyway.
Your dad wasn't already a fan? Your dad wasn't a fan?
No, he wasn't a fan. He not him and Bob Hope. He wasn't a fan of, but now he's kind of like more, into that type of comedy. I guess he just didn't grow up with it.
Well, you know what? Well, it's before my time too. But I thought everybody, especially your dad's age, you couldn't escape Jerry Lewis movies on television at one time. I mean, he was always the Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
My mom was into him, but like, it wasn't, they were just on TV and stuff, and I guess, I don't know. Like, I guess my dad, later on I learned he had seen one of Jerry's inspirational conferences. He had like conferences that he would go to.
Oh, the laughter and healing thing that he used to do?
Motivational stuff.
Yeah.
So he saw him before I did, apparently, back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I was like so jealous at that time.
Yeah, you're talking about
But anyway,
the laughter and healing seminars. I think he used to do.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, back to the moment that I had. It was like a few years later, like back in 2011. I remember getting into Gary Lewis and the Playboys music, and then I discovered that Jerry Lewis was Gary's father.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And so I like put it on my YouTube playlist because I remembered Cinderfella, and so I was like, I gotta watch that movie again because I really liked it when I saw it all those years ago. So at this point, I was like 21. Then a few months later, I put it in my playlist to watch, but I didn't watch it. And then someone on YouTube mentioned that one of my favorite people looks like Jerry Lewis. So I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I'll watch it. I'll watch it this time now. So I watched Cinderfella, and I was like, oh, I really like this. And again, and maybe I'll go see some other movies that I see on the side in the recommended section. So I went to see. I clicked on Rockabye Baby, and that's still my favorite to this day.
You talking about when he's doing the rock and roll band thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that not epic?
And then he takes care of the three babies.
Yes.
And that he loves the one girl that he grew up with.
Right.
And her sister has a crush on him, and eventually, they get together, and it's just
Connie Stevens. Oh yeah.
And stuff.
Yeah, there are a lot of great lines in that movie that I love. Rockabye Baby, when he's taking the parenting classes, and the lady says, the other student says, "Now, what's your preferred method? Bottle feeding, or?" And Jerry says, "Oh, the bottle, definitely. They're so much easier to rinse out." It's just.
Yeah.
Now, Thad.
So
Thad,
yeah.
Is your story similar? How you discovered Jerry?
I've been kind of smiling because some of the things Kat's been talking about, I can relate to. I think probably the earliest memory is my grandpa used to record like tons of old movies and like different stuff on VHS tapes back when VHS tapes was a thing. And so like, he had like a ton of like, what was it, Buster Keaton, and my family and I, we would watch Buster Keaton, and on some of these, he'd add the commercials, and so my earliest memory was I saw this AMC television marathon for Jerry Lewis, and they had compilations of different clips, and I was like, who is this guy? Like, that was probably my, it was like a 1-minute promo with like, funny faces or certain gags, and that caught my eye. And then I think probably the first movie I saw was The Nutty Professor because my grandpa, lent out a bunch of tapes to my folks and was like, hey, these are some funny movies, this is a, Jerry Lewis picture, whatever. And, I think I watched it and, like, it didn't really click. Like, I wasn't totally captivated. Like, I was in love with the film. And then I think I became a fan because I would go to my local library and I was into like all the classic movies and stuff, classic music, and I would watch different television shows like, Groucho Marx and, Lucy and Jack Benny and all this stuff. And then I would watch, behind the scenes features. And in one of these particular programs, they were talking about, Dean and Jerry in the Colgate Comedy Hour, and I was like, oh man, this seems really interesting. So I went to the library, and then I found that they had a whole catalog of Jerry Lewis movies, and I ordered or special ordered every single movie, and I got like 3 or 4 movies in, and then I was like, man, there's something here, and I was just captivated. I think probably some of the earliest ones was Jumping Jacks with Dean Martin, which is pretty funny. It's like, I think it's one of their best war pictures that they did.
Yeah.
And I remember watching Boing Boing with Tony Curtis.
Yeah.
Which is kind of shuffled under the radar, but it's one of the few movies where Yeah, where he was able to do a little bit of his comedy, but then he was kind of like also kind of a straight man, kind of, and you don't see many of those pictures with him doing that, and so I remember those two kind of caught my eye.
Yeah.
And then I was just hooked, and I was like, okay, I gotta see every single Jerry Lewis picture and collect everything, and yeah.
Now, I think what made Jerry Lewis exceptional was the fact that he was so tapped into the mind of a child, and a naughty child. He just again, I said earlier that he was unguarded, and he would allow himself to be as completely off the chain and feminine, whatever it needed to be. And I'll say, of course, Martin Lewis is what really made him a star. I was actually very, very late getting on the Martin and Lewis train. I was a Jerry Lewis fan first, and whenever one of the old movies would come on, if it was a Martin Lewis movie, excuse me, I'm fighting a cold here, I would actually avoid it or half-heartedly watch it. It took me forever to appreciate Dean Martin. And boy, what an idiot I was. And then I actually wanted to bring up something just to show just how that Dean Martin, a lot of people say he was just as funny as Jerry. He certainly was able to shoot a line. Have you guys ever heard those those outtakes for those promos that Martin Lewis did for the movie The Caddy?
Yes, I have.
Okay, they're pretty, they're pretty X-rated. They're pretty X-rated, and of course, now this is when I first realized, okay, oh my God, Dean Martin was funny. Jerry Lewis said, yeah, the caddy, I'll make you shit, which was not the funniest thing in the world, but then Dean Martin said, cut out make, that's, I was like, that's the brilliant Dean Martin, and. Of course, the two together was magic, and people just love seeing them perform. When I watch the Colgate Comedy Hour shows, the part I like is always the last 20 minutes when they're in their tuxes performing with the band, doing basically what they did in their live shows. To me, that's Martin Lewis. A lot of the sketches are hit or miss, but when they're on stage being Martin and Lewis, they never miss. They never miss. So we're going to jump around here a little bit, kiddies, and I'm just going to ask some very random things. We know about his work with Muscular Dystrophy Association, and he never came out and expressed exactly what his sole motivation was. But do you guys remember in his 1982 autobiography, Jerry Lewis in Person, Jerry Lewis said that he wrote a letter to the MDA that was to not be opened until after his death. Do we know if that letter ever surfaced?
No, I don't think so.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I was trying to be public. I don't know.
Well, you know how things
I'm
are.
not sure. I remember hearing.
I don't know.
Kat, you find everything else. Get on it, girl. Okay.
Right after this phone session, I'll look it up.
It might not, sometimes, it might exist, but maybe the lawyers read it or something. Maybe it was quite personal. Like, I know there's speculation that there's a child that he possibly almost adopted that had muscular dystrophy.
Oh.
So there was like some article back in the 80s that they researched an adoption that supposedly took place. There was like a lot of articles in 1953 about them, Patty and Jerry. Patty is Jerry Lewis's wife, adopting a little girl named Sally Mae.
Right.
And then she was never heard from again. So there was like, what happened? People were speculating, what happened to this girl? And apparently, the adoption agency took her back, I believe.
Wow.
And this is like speculation because like nobody was wanting to talk about this adoption that may or may not have taken place.
Wow.
Jerry was silent about it. Patty was silent about it. Even Joe
Stabile.
Mr. Bill, Jerry's manager was like, I'm not going to say anything. And then the secretary, Jerry's former secretary, was like, they adopted a kid, but then they had to take her back. The adoption agency wouldn't let them have a sick child, basically. So, I mean, that's speculation, and whether that had anything to do with him. I mean, certainly Jerry was involved with MDA at least 2 years prior to that. He started with MDA in 1951.
Yeah.
Promoted it on the Colgate Comedy Hour and then their Martin Lewis radio show.
Yeah. I think it goes back further than that. Yeah. I think it goes back to the late 40s, actually, because that's when they were doing radio in the late 40s. Okay. And keep going. Well, I was just going to, like I said, because we're so pressed for time, we're going to kind of just jump around on various topics, and we're actually going to play a song, something that Jerry was recorded, because he was also a brilliant dancer and musician. He could play very a few instruments, actually. A lot of people don't know that, but he was a great singer. Pardon me again. Now, here's the rule. If I cough, y'all have to cough. All right. So, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Jerry, he's smiling right now. Okay. Jerry Lewis, Buddy Love, when he played Buddy Love and did That Old Black Magic, I don't know how people thought that he was spoofing Dean Martin. I agree with film critic Gene Siskel. To me, he's doing Frank Sinatra. Especially when he says lines like, hey, you're kooky, and all that. I mean, that's just dripping with Sinatra. But when I listen to him vocalize on That Old Black Magic, I'm thinking Sammy Davis had to have been an influence on him as a singer as well. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's true. I never thought about that in that way with him when he's saying that.
Well, when that's very Sammy.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know a lot of people still think that he was trying to throw shade at Dean Martin from imitating him. That's in no way Dean. If anything, that was Frank and maybe even Jerry's dark side.
Yeah.
I would agree with that because Frank, was probably most likely bipolar. Jerry had similar,
Well, not only was Sinatra bipolar, he was also a Sagittarius, and that's just nothing but drama. So but but I digress.
Both of them had similar, personality, issues where they were loving and sweet one minute, and then if you rub them the wrong way, they can turn on you.
Wow, insight. Kat, you are impressing me, girl. I love it. Okay, so we're going to actually listen to Jerry Lewis's 1962. Did he actually record it in 62? The film came out in 63, but did he actually record That Old Black Magic in 62? Okay. Here's That Old Black Magic from the King of Comedy, Mr. Jerry Lewis, and we'll be back to talk more about Jerry Lewis with Thad and Kat.
Black magic has me in its spell. That old black magic that you weave so well. Those icy fingers up and down my spine. The same old witchcraft when your eyes meet mine. The same old tingle that I feel inside. And then that elevator starts its ride. And down, down, down I go, round, round, round I go like a leaf that's caught in the tide. I should stay away, but what can I do? I hear your name and I'm a flame with such a burning desire that only your kiss can put out the Fire, you're the lover I have waited for. You're the maid that fate has me created for. Babadoo, wee, and every time your lips meet mine, baby, down and down and down I go, round and round and round I go, in a spin, loving the spin that I am in, under that old black magic called, old black magic called, old black magic called love, love, love.
And we're back with Thad and Kat here on Modern Retro Radio, talking about the great comedian Jerry Lewis, dearly departed Jerry Lewis. Now, Thad, you're an aspiring filmmaker yourself. You understand the technical aspects. You understand lighting, camera shots and frames, and you know that Jerry Lewis taught film in California, at one of the universities out in California. And, you know, he's had students who went on to become pretty big filmmakers themselves, most notably Steven Spielberg. What has Jerry's influence as a filmmaker been on you?
Oh boy, that's a good question. You know, I liked how, you know, when he was making films, he was very devoted to, you know, his work and the product. Like if you watch the film, you know, if it's even the remotely slapstick film, if you watch any of the behind the scenes footage, he's like very serious, very professional. He rehearsed, I think, like takes until they were, you know, right. And then when I think Kat might be able to verify this, but he would, you know, try to record it in one take so that it would be, you know, natural. It wouldn't feel forced.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you watch any of the director's commentary that he did on some of those DVDs where he did the commentary? Have you heard any of those yet?
I've listened to a few. I think he did it with Steve Lawrence.
Yes, and with all due respect to Steve Lawrence, I don't know why they picked him. To me, Bill Richmond would have been the perfect person to do those with, but, you know, don't get me started.
Oh, definitely.
You know, but I did still learn some things about Jerry, things that annoyed him. For instance, getting to Cinderella. Kat, there are some things that Jerry Lewis didn't like about the script in Cinderella. Lines that exist for the sole purpose of making sure the audience understands what the plot is. And Jerry Lewis, he hated that. And every time he heard it in the movie, he would go, plot, you know. It was just one of his little things. And Thad, do you remember the joke about in the movie Cinderella where he lights the candle and it gets so bright it creates, you know, that hot spot, which is actually a no-no in filmmaking. And Jerry is having to explain to the studio that's the joke. Did you hear that commentary?
I think I missed that one, but I think I remember one on the Family Jewels when he's readjusting the camera lens and he's actually doing it on the actual camera when what is it, Donna Butterworth? I can't remember her name, but yeah, he's readjusting. But he was always doing different things like that to kind of, you know, even on the Patsy, you go through the whole movie, and then at the end he has kind of like somebody was related to like a Mel Brooks style where he's like, hey, you know, I'm not dead. It's a movie set. You know, we're breaking for lunch, and he shows you the whole studio thing. You know, he was doing different little bits in each of his films.
Yeah, and speaking of Mel Brooks, you know, when I watch Mel Brooks films, and I love them, by the way, I always found myself, as a Jerry Lewis fan, a little jealous. Excuse me, because I wanted, you know, I always felt Jerry Lewis had that kind of film in him. And when I finally got around to watching my favorite Jerry Lewis movie, which is Which Way to the Front, I thought, oh my God, this is Jerry Lewis's Mel Brooks movie. It really is. It is a wonderful satire. I don't know why people don't get into that movie. It is outstanding. I think people dismiss it because it is at the end of his commercial heyday for a long while. But people really just need to just judge the work. It is an outstanding film. And when we get around to hanging out, Thad, I'm going to force you to watch it.
Yeah. But at least the Germans recognized it, and they gave him best director.
That's right.
There in Germany.
They did. They gave him best. Yeah. And what's interesting is that's I mean, it's a totally in the 70s. You know, he didn't do very many films because I believe it was after he did The Day of the Clown Cried. I feel that in the 70s he was trying to do different projects. I heard he had tried to purchase The Catcher in the Rye. But the author, wouldn't release it. So I feel that Jerry Lewis in the 70s would have been a very interesting filmmaker. I mean, he has Which Way to the Front, which is it's kind of I know there was attempts on Hitler's wife, and Lewis just takes it and goes in a satirical area where he meets Hitler, and it's there's some funny jokes in that.
Very funny jokes. When Kessering is meeting the panel, and all their names are brands of beer, just things like that, just those little subtle things, and I just really don't want to spoil it, but it really is a brilliant movie, and in the opening monologue that Brendan Byers III says, he says it is every man's right to be killed for his country. That is major satire, and I'm sure some Vietnam influence had something to do with that line too. So anyway, but let's back way up and talk about Kat's favorite period. She is the Martin and Lewis person. So when you want to watch Martin Lewis, do you find yourself going more to their concerts or their films?
Just anything, just all of it. I know a lot of people like the Colgate Comedy Hour shows because it shows them at their wildest and most spontaneous. But the films, they have great moments. Certainly, it had to be watered down because Hal Wallace, their producer, made them do a formula of where Dean was the guy who was kind of a jerk in some of the parts of the movie, and then he redeems himself at the end, and then him and Jerry make up and they're buddies again, and they walk off into the sunset or whatever.
What's funny is that even though with each picture and the tension growing between them, to me the films just got better. You're Never Too Young is just
that's a great one.
God, is that not a great movie? And just
you have Perry Mason as the villain in that movie, which is so funny in itself.
Right. And remember the scene with the guy who plays the little brother of the girl who wants Dean Martin, and the kid thinks that Jerry Lewis is the one who stole the Majuba diamond, and then Jerry is doing his Humphrey Bogart impression, and back and forth between the two. Yeah. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. One of my favorite moments. And, there's so many moments like that. I love Living It Up. Just from the beginning to the end,
And Dean said he didn't have any good comedy moments, and then that they were all the same. But, he actually was pretty funny in a lot of those movies.
Absolutely.
I don't know what he was talking about.
Yeah,
in Living It Up,
Go ahead, Kat.
Living It Up, he puts on the glasses
right.
every time he has to speak in a serious voice, or he does a fall off the building. He runs outside to chase Jerry's character, Homer Flagg, and he falls, and he's just dangling off the side of the building, and Jerry's just on the phone, ordering shrimp or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Help me."
Yeah, and they were always playing around with audio and video tricks. For instance, in Partners, where Dean is covering Jerry as the sheriff fighting this guy, and they're in this dark room, and the bad guy, he thinks he's beating up Jerry Lewis, and then the guy says, "Where are you?" And Dean Martin, with Jerry Lewis's voice overdubs, and "Here I am." Those are the moments that I love. And yeah, Dean Martin had plenty of funny moments, but a lot of scripts also had to be retailored as well. To appease them. Which is
Kat, you might be able to verify this, but wasn't there a point where I think somebody was telling Martin and Lewis that they should do more, they should branch out and do more serious projects as a team or whatever, and they were trying to give, like, Dean some of the more funny lines, and then Hal Walsh or somebody was like, hey, this is the formula, don't screw it up. Like, Jerry's the laughs and Dean is the straight man.
Wow, I never heard that.
Yeah. Well, also, like by the Three Ring Circus, Don McGuire was like the writer for that, and he kind of hated Dean. So that's probably why he kind of,
Interesting.
didn't give him as good of a role. And he thought he was a great singer, but he couldn't talk. So he didn't think he was a good actor at all. And then he didn't like Jerry singing at all. But he thought he was funny, I guess. He was kind of like a kiss ass to, like, Jerry, one of the hangers-on, like laughing at all the jokes, but then talking about him behind his back type of people that, attached themselves to Jerry.
Well, something Jerry Lewis said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but something that Jerry Lewis said that happened around that period is that when outside forces, come into the play, he said one day he woke up and he realized that they both had camps. Jerry, he had his camp, and Dean, he had a camp. And, of course, everybody in your camp, they're going to be a bunch of ass-kissing sycophants and tell you how great you are and how you're better than the other one, and you're just doomed. But Jerry, being the contradiction he is, as much as he loved Dean, the way that he found that tamore for Dean and never told Dean, but yet he felt the need to be competitive and steal lines from Jerry from Dean and upstage him. It's really, and I think that goes really to his childhood. So it was like they were each other's best support system and biggest competitive threats as well. That's what I've gathered.
Yeah. Also, I think Dean just really wanted Jerry to, talk to him about what he was going to do or, and trust in him. But then as Jerry got these other people who didn't care and were just laughing at whatever jokes without something not even being funny,
Right.
I mean, that hurt Dean. Dean was, wanting him to, like, confide in him, and then that's what drove them apart throughout the later years, because Jerry was putting his trust in people that just didn't care about him.
So when they split up, and when they go ahead, Kat. You have something that you want to add to that?
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah.
When they finally did split up, and Jerry didn't know for sure what he was going to do, and he did that historic fill-in for Judy Garland.
Yeah.
Is there footage of that night? I think there's film of it, but is there audio from that night?
Yeah, there's video of it on YouTube. I'm not sure if it was that specific night. There's he filled in for her, I think, another night too.
I
a few
see.
other nights after that. So there's no audio of it.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's kind of like the first night that Martin and Lewis became a team, and supposedly they did 2 hours of just comic brilliance, but there's no footage of it, which makes sense. And then you hear this, Jerry Lewis, he's winging it for a couple of hours, but where's the footage? I just want to hear that kind of magic happening in the moment. So.
I'm sure there's probably footage somewhere in his vault of things. There's probably, because I think he filmed their Dean and Jerry's Martin Lewis's later stuff, of course, and there's footage of their performance at the Cabana in 1954, and there's footage of them at the Sands in 1956. During the supposed time when they weren't talking. Jerry Lewis always said that, like, the last 10 months of their partnership that they were not talking to each other. I don't really believe that.
That's impossible.
Obviously, it wasn't, the same friendship as it had been, but there's stories of them playing games with each other on set, and there's, their behavior on stage at the Sands, which was in March of 1956, which was 3 months before they broke up, where they're, clearly just hugging each other and embracing and, playing around, even pinching each other.
Well, another thing that did, one of the reasons that they didn't socialize too much And if I remember right from the biography, the A&E biography, the one that Alan King narrated, Jerry's wife didn't get along with Dean's new wife because, Dean, excuse me, he left his first wife for Jean Biggers, who became a friend of Dean's to the very end. So I think that was a genuine love that they had. But of course, I can see why Patty wouldn't want to be involved in that out of just loyalty to Dean's first wife. Right.
And also, I mean, I think Jean did like Jerry at some points, but she also wanted Dean to break free and not be, partners with Jerry anymore because she felt, he could do better, I guess. And then there was jealousy between Jerry and Dean's wife, Jean, because they just both wanted Dean's attention, basically.
Gotcha.
And, both of them had created that, but they were kind of jealous of each other.
Okay.
I think Jean kind of was a similar personality in a way, like Jerry, and I guess they, clashed, basically.
Gotcha. I'm curious, as a filmmaker, from a filmmaker's perspective, what are some of the better technical gags that you've seen in a Martin and Lewis film? Anything that come to mind?
Oh man, Martin and Lewis, dang. It's been, I can think of many from Jerry Lewis's solo films, but if I think back...
Well, that wasn't the question, so I'm sorry. You have to answer about Martin and Lewis. No, actually, I think it's the murder, I think it's, oh man. What was one of the earlier ones where something about a murder or something? Am I thinking of not the Stooge? Oh my goodness. What's it called?
I remember, I think it's Sailor Beware. I think there's a gag where I think he's getting his blood drawn or something, and then
that's a good one.
water spewing out of him, and he makes some, it's been ages since I've seen that film, but yeah, the water spewing out of him, and he makes that joke. But it's interesting because in later films, you have just slight gags, from the Patsy, when he meets the music instructor that's going to teach him how to sing, he tries to close the doors, and the doors just, they don't close, they
Right.
keep going.
Right.
And then what's interesting is the gag that always stuck out of my mind, because everyone, they laughed at the bit where he's knocking over all of the he's knocking over all the precious.
The first time I saw that, I was so impressed because he just caught them all in the nick of time.
And he catches them right as before they fall down. He practiced 1,000 times. And one of the gags is that where the music instructor, he's telling him how to breathe, and he breathes, and he yells at him, and then his eyebrows come down. And I always wondered, how the heck did he do that? Because that must have hurt or whatever. And then he combs his eyebrow back, and that joke is totally skipped over. And I'm like, that's a great joke.
And of course, the weightlifting scene in the Nutty Professor, I mean, that got screams in the audience the first time. When his arm stretched, the weightlifting scene in the Nutty Professor, that just blew everybody away.
Oh yeah, that was good. And then the scene leading up to that, where he's in the bed and he's scratching his feet.
Right. Okay.
In every film, even if it wasn't one of his betterly known ones, or it wasn't accepted by the public as much, there's still little jokes in each one of his films that are just like that.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take another break and play another song from the great Jerry Lewis. I think we're going to play We've Got a World That Swings, also from the 1963 classic Nutty Professor. And we'll be back to chat a little bit more with Thad and Kat here on Modern Retro Radio.
Up at dawn and sleepy and yawning, still the taste of wine. Then I remember you're mine, and I've got a world that's fine. What's before me? Routines that bore me. Punch the clock at 8. But what a lucky guy I am. I've got a world that's great. Atom bombs, Cape Canaveral and false alarms. Half the universe is up in arms. So I flip a little too until I'm holding you. What's the hassle? I'll buy the castle. We can live like kings. If we're together forever, I've got a world that you've got a world that we've got a world that swings. I'd like to take you through this wild, wonderful venture. Fly like a kite through space, no strings. I don't want to lose that bell that rings. I've got a world that you've got a world that we've got a world that swings. We've got a world that swings.
Okay, and we are back talking about the great comedy legend Jerry Lewis, how he's inspired me. He's inspired my two guests, Thad, inspiring filmmaker, and Kat, a choreographer, and quite an archivist, a very well researched archivist when it comes to Jerry Lewis. And Thad, he's a very well researched on the history of Jerry Lewis's mysterious film, The Day the Clown Cried. But Kat brought up something during the break that I found very interesting, that Jerry Lewis's films were, considered family fare, when really there was a lot of adult, mature elements in his film. And in fact, I think Jerry Lewis even tried to grow up after he left Paramount, and he started making what is known as sex comedies. They were called sex comedies in the 60s, and Boing Boing is definitely one, and Way Out, his reunion with Connie Stevens, is definitely one. And there are definitely some lines in there where I'm thinking, wow, that's, definitely tongue-in-cheek. Where he says to her, a man just wants to go to bed and get some. It's like, So, what are some of the more sexual innuendo type moments and throughout his career that you guys have noticed that people might have missed?
Well, definitely on the Colgate Comedy Hour, there was like one part where Jerry comes out to confront Dean and like, I'm going to get you back. And like, you could hit me with the whips and the chains, but not in front of the audience.
Wow.
That's a memory.
I maybe remember that.
Wow.
And like other parts where they're just like obviously like kissing each other.
Yeah.
And like getting like really like crazy. And like there's one scene where on the Colgate Comedy Hour where they're in the bathtub, both Dean and Jerry, and they're splashing around in the water, and like Jerry pulls Dean in, like looks like he's going to bite him in the butt. Like I don't even know what was going to happen there. And then like also at another point, like Jerry comes out of the bathtub and you can see through his pants on 1950s television.
Oh well,
like,
everything was live back then.
I was like, wow.
Well, there were doubts that he was Jewish, so he had to prove it, So, I don't know.
And then like other points where they're like telling each other to take off your clothes. I don't even know you.
I don't even know you. Yeah.
I don't even know you.
I shall remain clothed. That way, nothing will be said. Yes. Okay. Yeah, and that's what I love about him. How he, was so in touch with his feminine side. Because he knew that it would get the laugh. Jerry Lewis. It takes a very, for him to be such an insecure guy. He was also very secure in himself as a man when it came to expressing affection and crying and
yeah.
expressing showing his films, his emotions.
If you look at if you look at it, it says Paramount Films. It's interesting because there is scenes in his solo ones where it's like, don't give up the ship. You know, he's on his honeymoon night.
Oh, love that
and they
movie.
have those little jokes, you know, where the military police keep taking away before
yes.
him and his wife can go to bed. And then you have Who's Mine in the Store, where, you know, he's trying to save up money, and his girlfriend is like, you know, be fresh with me, and, you know, they're almost like, it's like I don't remember seeing too many of those jokes in those era of time period of the movie, you know, but in those two ones, it's kind of almost pushed out there a little bit more.
Right.
I would say artists and models for the Martin Lewis films like has the most innuendos, like partly because of the Frank Cashlin film, and you know he likes to put a lot of visual sexual metaphors in there, and you know a lot of different jokes in there. And they had to cut a lot of the stuff out from the final print because it was just like too much.
Interesting.
And I was like, this is the final product? Wow.
Wow. Well, I don't want us to run out of time because I know there's some other things we wanted to cover. Now, you guys want to talk about Jerry Lewis's influence on people that followed him. Did you have some people in mind particularly you wanted to mention?
I have, well, you know, like most people, you know, most comedians nowadays, I think you have like Jerry Seinfeld who says, you know, his favorite movie is The Bellboy. He loves Jerry. I think, you know, you have Jim Carrey who seems to be channelizing in his earlier 90s films, like, you know, a lot of maybe the 1950s Colgate Jerry. And then a couple segments ago, we were talking about, you know, when Lewis was teaching film at, was it UCLA? Was that what it is?
I think so, yeah.
USC.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had Spielberg, and I was listening to a radio show a while back, and they had Robert Zemeckis, who's a director. He's done, Back to the Future, and Forrest Gump, and Flight, and, you know, many other films. And one guy was like, you know, how did you get into movie making? And he's like, well, I was watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson in the early 70s, and they had, I think either Lewis was the guest host or he was on as a guest, and he's like, I think he was on as a guest, and he came on, and Carson was talking about, you know, teaching film, and Robert Zemeckis is like, oh man, you know, there's a film class, like I gotta look this up, and so he actually looked it up and, you know, pursued a film career. All because he saw Lewis, you know, talking about, hey, there's a class on film that I never even knew about.
Wow.
So that was really interesting. I was like, Robert Zemeckis, who did all these movies, like he found out about a film class from Jerry Lewis. That's crazy.
You know what? I want to jump in and throw in a personal experience. You know, you've seen in documentaries when people talk about when someone's on a set and they talk about video assist with the idea that Jerry Lewis pioneered. And, you know, he said there's always been those stories when someone says, hey, you know, who came up with this idea? Jerry Lewis, huh? And we're like, wow, really, Jerry Lewis? Well, I actually worked on an independent film in Cleveland, Ohio about 10 years ago. And I was able to enlighten someone because they mentioned video assist. And I said, do you guys know who created that? And they said, no. I said, Jerry Lewis. And they were all like pleasantly surprised. So it gave me a lot of pride to mention that. Now, Kat, I wanted you to talk about your project. Is it a book that's published or something you're currently working on?
So a few months ago, I was contacted by Michael J. Hayde, who was doing a book on Martin Lewis's radio and TV shows, which is not very much talked about, you know, in other books. So I gave him a lot of photos, and I helped them out with, you know, some of the reunions, because a lot of people don't know that besides the 1976 reunion on the MDA telethon, there was multiple reunions besides that, from 1957 all the way to 1989 that they had. There was at least 10 public reunions and even more private reunions that we just don't know about.
Right.
I helped him out with, you know, some of the audio. He found other stuff on my YouTube channel, and I helped him out that way. And, you know, we talked about, certain stuff about their relationship, and I helped him out with that, and he gave me several references in the book.
Okay, cool.
Along with the photos and stuff.
That's cool.
So that was fun.
Okay.
And then, he's also influenced me in my choreography, and just this last piece I done, which is inspired by the Nutty Professor. The scientist changes and puts a spell on everybody. Jerry influenced me in that way, and even in some of the movement I've done.
Okay.
And Bob Fosse was another choreographer that was influenced by him, and I've known other
wow.
choreographers that, were influenced by his movement as well. So, he influenced people across, multiple areas of art.
Yep.
There's a few other people I wanted to mention that he influenced in comedy. There's Martin Short, John Ritter, and his character Jack Tripper on Three's Company was highly, influenced by Jerry's character.
I saw a lot of Jerry Lewis in that character.
Was a huge fan, yeah. Chevy Chase even. I know some people in music were even influenced by him. Mm-hmm. I know Bob Dylan, I think, for a while, had really wanted to do stuff like that. It's just random people that you would never expect were influenced by him.
Okay. And before we run out of time, I want Thad to mention his influence as well, but I want to first say mine. Jerry Lewis, I have come to accept that he was not a perfect human being, not even close. I do think that he was a good man, but he was also a very flawed man. But, the fact that we all know the dirt, we all know about him leaving his kids out of his will, we know about his affairs, and we know about all that. But the fact that I'm able, excuse me, I coughed, so we all have to cough. All right, thank you. Okay, no. I'm actually glad that I know the dark side about Jerry, because now when I watch Jerry Lewis, I really am appreciating his art. I'm not watching this person that I admire just because he is who he is. I'm talking like Lewis now, but I'm watching the work, as Jerry would say. And, and so I can say with a clean conscience that the man was genuinely funny. So how's he, what would you say is your overall influence in your life with Jerry Lewis, Thad?
Well, for me, as a lover of film, and then doing different independent projects and volunteer film and movies, it holds a special place in my heart because Lewis was so serious about the films that he made, and he channeled a lot of that for kids. And even for adults, and I especially love it in the films where you can have a scene of comedy, and then all of a sudden he directs like a totally serious scene in there, like the Family Jewels. You have him trying to not have the girl taken away, and he does these things to let her stay with him. I can't remember if it's a niece or something.
Well, he was her chauffeur. He was her chauffeur. Who looked just like all the other uncles, but we're not going to mention that. But no, well, guys, we are unfortunately. Pardon me. We are running out of time, but can you guys go ahead and promise that we can do this again? Because I would like to do just a whole show on just the day the clown cried and a couple other serious projects that really deserve some in-depth discussion. So will you guys please do this again with me sometime?
Oh,
I would love it.
All right. This has been a ball. And I knew it would fly by. Thank you so much. So again, this is Audi talking with Thad, a filmmaker, and Kat, a choreographer, and two younger fans talking with a not so younger fan. And yet we all love the one and only Jerry Lewis. So unfortunately, this time has flown by, but we're gonna do it again because it's my station. I can do whatever I want. So that's how it works. Okay, and we'll be when this run, we'll definitely need to promote this because people need to hear this discussion. It's been great. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All righty. Okay, and you are listening to Modern Retro Radio. Back to the music.
The classic rock stations on mainstream radio may be keeping the legends rich, but at Modern Retro Radio, we're keeping them relevant. Keep it locked here on Modern Retro Radio.